that said, we're excited to be here with everybody again. It's been a while. And before we jump into talking about your wine club wines, and we'd also love to know what you're drinking as you're watching, we thought we might just sort of give a little update on what we've been up to here at the ranch. It's been, as I said, 6 months since we've talked to you all, and we're about halfway through the growing season. So it might be good to talk about where we are in 2021.
Yeah, and you've probably heard, but it's dry. I mean, it's really dry, and we get an average of around 30 inches of rain here, and this year we got 12 through the winter, and the year before we had 17. So it's two extremely dry years back to back, and I'm seeing things in our vineyard and in other vineyards that I've never seen before. In terms of just very limited vine growth, and some areas where the vines are really struggling to grow at all. It's not, happily, it's not a big portion of the vineyard, but there is some of the vineyard that we won't get any fruit from. Driving around the valley, and I went through parts of Carneros yesterday where on a lot of hillside vineyards, there were vines dying and also, not growing at all. I've never really seen that before. We tried to, adjust for the low soil moisture by doing some of our vineyard work as early as possible this year, and I think that helped a lot.
Because it then allows the vine to, it's not sending energy into parts of the plant that you aren't interested in.
Right, and one of the challenges, especially in a dry year, is to generate enough shoot length and canopy development to ripen the fruit the way we want to. And one of the biggest jobs in the vineyard is, we call it suckering. We go through and remove the shoots we don't want, leaving just the ones that have the clusters. And early on, when you have a lot of shoots growing, they're all sort of bleeding water and energy from the plant, water most importantly. And if you can remove the extra shoots early, you'll get longer shoot growth in the remaining shoots. And that worked pretty well for us. I see vineyards where people did the canopy management work later, and I think that you see a big difference in shoot length and vineyard health. So it's different this year. There are a lot of people that have really no water at all at this point. And it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. I think there's this idea that, the vines need to struggle, like it's a very romantic idea. And there is some scientific thinking behind that, but, and that it's about energy balance, right? But like, this is too much.
Yeah, this is beyond. And when we say struggle, what's important that the vines really run out of water to the point that they stop growing around this time of year. If they have too much water and grow all year long, that's really not what you want from a fruit quality standpoint. But all plants need water still, and they are fairly drought tolerant, certainly by standards of other agricultural crops, but they'll start to die if they don't get enough. Yeah. Not just not grow, but not survive.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. Anything good about this year that we're seeing?
the good news so far, really, we've had one heat spell that was, quite hot. It hasn't been as bad as what places like Portland and Seattle and,
right. But we have hit 100 degrees once already.
Right.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's actually been quite a cool spring and early summer. We've had a lot of highs in the upper 70s and very low 80s. I think through this week, again, our highs will be, 78 to 81, which is really nice. And that also helps when soil moisture is low.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on and talk about some wines.
Was that too depressing?
It was a little depressing. But, it is what it is, right? Okay. So, but as you said, there are some, it's not every part of the vineyard, and we do think we'll be able to make some wine this year, right?
Yeah. Oh no, definitely. And actually, I do think. We're in reasonably good shape. We have really canopy development one in most places. The problem where I see the problems are on some fairly small hillside blocks, and I think they were sort of dependent on water penetrating fairly deeply into the soil, and then in one way or another, coming out along the hillside, and the top 4 feet or so of soil got reasonably saturated, but deeper than that, the water didn't really get to. And I think it's showing up in those hillside blocks in ways I haven't seen before. But overall, I feel fairly good about where we are, and we have a little water to use, and we'll use it when we need to.
All right. Wow. Okay, well, let's jump into the first wine, but before we do that, we got some notes that the sound isn't so great. So we're going to do a little mic check here. Is that better? I guess we can't. Much better. Somebody says, awesome. Okay.
What did you do?
I switched which microphone we're using.
Oh, so we're using this one? Oh.
I unplugged it and I plugged it back in. Yeah. All right. Well,
this is the first time we've ever done this. Yeah.
Thanks, Kurt. We see you're our AV guy here. All right. Well, let's talk about some Albarino. This is something that always cheers me up a little bit. So we're going to taste through 6 wines tonight because we have people on here who are in the Taste of Hendry Club, and you guys got in your summer shipment this Albarino, the 2019, the 2018 Primitivo, and the 2017 Block 7 and 22 Zinfandel. And then we also have friends of Hendry on as well, and they got the 2018 barrel fermented Chardonnay, the 2018 Pinot Noir, and the 2018 Cabernet Franc. So we're going to taste them sort of in the order that you would. We'll do the Albarino and the Chardonnay, and then move into the reds. And as I said, we'll stop and answer any questions you guys have about the wines. But we thought we'd just share a little bit about the year that they came from, anything that was particularly notable, and then some of the stuff, as always, that we like to eat with them. So this 2019,
we do like to eat
a lot.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We've been known to put it away, but, so speaking of rain, 2019, it was sort of, I mean, it was actually a pretty wet year, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And in the last, I have all the rain numbers here really in the last, well, we've had 2 wet years in the last decade really. And the winter of 2018 into 2019 was one of them. We had, around 48 inches of rain, and a lot of that came fairly late in the spring. So it was a very, it was the opposite of this year. We had a lot of shoot length and shoot growth, lateral growth. We had a lot of, weed growth in the vineyard. There was a lot more tractor work that had to be done. And Albarino, I think one of the things about the Albarino is that it does, it's quite consistent. I think some of our other grapes are a lot more expressive of vine vigor and yearly variation than Albarino. So this, to me, even though in some ways it is very different than some of the other recent growing years, it's made the kind of Albarino we expect. It's very got a sort of intense, fresh, high acid. This one has
some good acidity.
Yeah. Almost 7 grams per liter of TA, 7 grams per liter of tartaric acidity, and that's
yeah, I always think it's, and we should have said before too, I hope, I think you all are old hat at this, but I hope you're not waiting for us to drink, but we'll drink now. So cheers. We're so glad to have everybody with us again, and we're looking forward to more of these virtual events again, but also some more in-person events if you're local. So, but if you're not, don't worry, we'll be on here as well, and we'll get better at it again. But when you mentioned all of the, sort of the shoot growth and all the vigor that happened in 2019, I always think it's really interesting, and something that people don't always realize is that people think of harvest as the busiest time in the vineyard, and it's quite busy, but the spring is also incredibly busy, right? In terms of
I think more than, from a vineyard work perspective, the busiest time of the year is sort of early April through late June. I mean, it's starting to slow down now. We have a bunch of work sort of laid out in front of us, but it can be the work can be very time sensitive.
Well, that's
2019 is a year when we sort of fell behind on the vineyard work, partly because there was a lot more work to do than in an average year. And we're often work longer hours and fairly steadily through the spring. So spring,
Yeah,
busy
a
time.
lot of work. So this Albarino, I think all of us sort of think of it as the perfect summer wine. We were thinking about, what we like to pair with it. And I feel like everyone on here has heard me bang on and on about the fish tacos I like, so I'm not going to do that anymore. But I did go back and look at my own spending history here at the winery, the bottles that I have purchased and taken home.
We get some of our money back that way.
Yes, they've made some back that way, but the Albarino was top of the list, which is what I expected. So I was sort of surprised by some of the other wines on there, but this is one of my favorites. So I would say that this is something that the data shows that I drink this by itself too in the summer. I think it's lovely, as sort of an aperitif. You don't even really need a lot of food with it. But I am excited to pair it with, I have a recipe for these a mango salmon salad, kind of Thai spices and sauces and stuff like that with some like lime. And I think the lime and the mango and all of that, even though with salmon, I would normally go for a barrel fermented Chardonnay. I think this could be kind of a fun one to try with it.
Yeah.
Kind of zestiness.
A thought popped into my head that actually more of a story, but last week I was, traveling to sell wine for the first time since the pandemic started and had a series of evening events. And one of them was a dinner at a very Zoe's. We love Zoe's and we owe them a lot. Right? Yes. But they served this with it's sort of it was an amazing dish actually. There were scallops, there were little octopus and squid and a mix of seafoods, cooked and some fried, some not fried, but it was really good. And as I walked around and was talking to everybody, somebody said to me like, I tried this Albarino initially and I didn't like it because it tasted like lemon juice, but now with this seafood, it's great. So I wanted to say that's partly the point, right? We like this high acid wine with seafood for the same reason you like some lemon juice with seafood sometimes. Right. But it, also for this wine with me, it's an easy pairing with, things like oysters and with really good fresh seafood, raw or cooked. It's pretty amazing. I had another, it's also, we think of sometimes richer wines and we'll talk about the barrel fermented Chardonnay pairing well with richer flavors sometimes, but this kind of lean and more acidic style wine can also cut through very rich flavors pretty nicely. And one of the pairings at another restaurant was a crawfish bisque with this Albarino, which was super really creative and really good. Yeah,
normally that's something too a little richer. I would have thought the barrel fermented, but it's pretty good with this too. Yeah, I know. And if you look back to our December Hendry at Home tasting, we talked about pairings and the idea of complementing the flavors or the textures or everything, or sort of contrasting them. So that's kind of cool. Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about barrel fermented Chardonnay. So it's the 2018 that you have, and 4 of the 6 wines we're tasting tonight are 2018. So we thought we might talk a little bit about that year too. Now that we've talked about 2021 and 2020, 2019, but 2018 was sort of, I've been calling it average in a good way kind of year, right? Yeah, and I went back and looked at a bunch of data from the last 10 or 12 harvests, and 2018 was, kind of ideal, and in terms of when it started and when it ended, and the overall length of harvest, it was pretty like what I'd think of as a long-term average, but also it was a very easy harvest. So we had, steady, even temperatures. It really allowed us to get to the maturity levels we wanted with a lot of these grapes without particularly high sugars. It was really, really nice. And one of the things that struck me, starting with 2011, 13, 15, 17, 19, all the odd years had something pretty difficult about them. And I felt like the even years, 12, 14, 16, 18, were a lot easier and maybe some of my more favorite vintages of the last decades. We went off the rails a little bit with 20.
So
Yeah, I was
we
gonna say
kind of
that.
broke the streak there, but
Yeah.
it was an odd even thing there for quite a while. But yeah, 2018 was really nice, and I wish we had more like that.
Yeah. And so just in terms of the winemaking on this one, again, I always think of it as sort of one of our more complex wines, even compared to some of the reds, because of the barrel fermentation, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, the Albarino and the unoaked Chardonnay, we are fermenting those in stainless steel. Even all the reds, we ferment in stainless steel tanks, and then they get moved into barrels for aging. But
Right.
this one, we are actually fermenting in barrel, and that allows us to expose the wine to the lees, which the dead yeast cells at the end of fermentation. And then adds like a little bit of creaminess to the body and the texture of the wine. And it also adds a little bit of aromatics too.
Yeah.
People love to say things like brioche, which, you know, people at your dinner party will feel like, think you're very fancy if you throw out brioche, but you know, like toasty, yeasty kind of aromas. But that definitely adds like a layer of complexity too, in terms of just the winemaking, you know, getting it into the barrels and all of that, and doing that batonnage or the lees stirring. So it's definitely one of our more complex wines, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I really love this wine, and I start to feel like a broken record with the way I talk about it. But you know, to me, it starts with the vineyard and the fruit, and we have, you know, we list all the Chardonnay blocks on the back, but for the last several years, this has only from our oldest Chardonnay vines in Block 9. They were planted in 1974. And there's some of the oldest Chardonnay vines in Napa, and, you know, old vine Chardonnay is less of a thing than old vine Zinfandel, for example. But a lot has changed here in the lifespan of those vines, and it's gone through, you know, there was a period of time in the 80s when Chardonnay was worth essentially twice what Cabernet was, and now it's worth about a third of what Cabernet is. So there's very little good vineyard that's devoted to Chardonnay still, especially low yielding Chardonnay like this stuff. It averages a little less than 2 tons per acre. It was down around 1 ton per acre in 2018. And it's very difficult for a lot of people to sort of do this economically now. It helps that we've owned the vineyard as long as we have, and that we can, you know, turn it into wine and sell it ourselves instead of selling it to other people. But you know, there's a good reason why Chardonnay is a famous grape, and this is a very classic style of Chardonnay to me. So with our 2 Chardonnays, we make the winemaking difference obvious in terms of the way we label it, but it is really the unoaked Chardonnay. I feel like the idea is the expression of the primary fruit, but as you mentioned, we add some layers of complexity with the way we, you know, barrel age it, the oxygen exposure that brings.
Yep.
It's about a third new barrel. So the idea is not oaky, that's not the goal, but we want some barrel influence there at a more subtle level, and you get the effects of the lees contact. So
yeah, and we skip malolactic fermentation on this, as we do for all the whites, right? And that's sort of the process where you're converting malic acid into lactic acid. It kind of reduces the perception of acidity. You know, it doesn't feel quite as acidic as the unoaked Chardonnay, perhaps. But because we're skipping that, I think this, you know, we're adding creaminess in terms of the lees contact, but this maintains, to me at least, like a nice level of acidity that kind of counteracts or balances out the richness that you get on the palate.
Definitely. I think it's a great compromise with those things. It's not, I don't think it's too much of anything. It's in, you know, it has some of that, you know, intensity. There's still some freshness. It becomes more of a sort of a citrus. There's less of the kind of the melon sorts of things that I see in the unoaked Chardonnay, and it's more of a citrus kind of a fruit to me. And it's a great one.
I think compromise is a good word, or balance, you know. And I always say it's the Chardonnay that kind of converted me back to oakier Chardonnays. You know, not that this one is oaked or oaky, but it is oaked. And I for a long time just kind of wrote that off.
Yeah.
Flying, you know, even though I shouldn't have, I thought, oh, that's not for me. And it's a good example, I think, of how
she went in for the stereotypes.
I did. I shouldn't have, you know, and now I'm a Chardonnay evangelist. So drink more Chardonnay. So this is a favorite. I find it to be something I gravitate towards a lot, because I think goes nicely with a lot of different weeknight meals, you know, like salmon and chicken and
Yeah, and it
You
does,
know.
it's, it's not time to talk about turkey probably, but it's a really nice wine with turkey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do
Yeah.
salmon, foods that are a little richer.
Yeah,
It's a
got
little
like
richer
a
wine.
little heft, but it's not like overwhelming. So yeah, it's a favorite. So
So
curious.
Angela just came back. I got worried. We don't know what to do without her, but now she's back in the room. So
Before we go on to the Pinot, moving on to the reds, any questions about the Chardonnay or the Albarino? Tim asked if we would drink the Chardonnay with sushi.
yes, easy on the wasabi, definitely. Like I feel like I love sushi and I love fresh fish, but I feel like the way everybody seems to plaster it with a lot of wasabi that robs you of some of the more delicate flavors. I think with sushi, as long as you don't overdo the spicy stuff, works well.
Yeah.
Really well.
Yeah. All right.
Mind you, the Albarino could work there too.
Yeah.
Both.
Yeah. Be curious to know if that is what you're having tonight, Tim. So, all right, let's talk about Pinot, shall we?
Yeah.
Okay, 2018 Pinot. So this is one, and if you guys have a bottle of it handy, this is one I always like to point out to guests. If you look at the back of the label, oh, and that's really bright. So
Yeah, you can't see the back of the label there.
You've all got a bottle. So, as you all know, George puts so much information on the back about where Hendry's located, but also the blocks where the fruit comes from, the year they were planted, and the clone that they're planted to. And I always think it's just this one in particular, because we have 6 blocks of Pinot Noir. This one's got 5. It's a good example of just kind of the variety that we're working with.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
And Pinot's weird. Like it in terms of clonal variation, it's not like any other grape that I know. It has, you have the clonal variation that includes things like Pinot Gris and Pinot Blanc, but we have, some clones of Pinot that grow differently. We have ones that grow very upright, ones that are very floppy. We even have a clone that is more susceptible to frost damage than the others. It's really the only part of the vineyard that had significant frost damage this year. And also there, certainly through to the obviously the wine, you have significant differences there, but this is I wish we could make a Pinot like this every year. I really like this one.
This one?
It's the only wine that we make. The Pinot, when we pick it, it tends to ferment very quickly. And that's, usually the reason we give for not adding yeast to it. But the fact that we don't add yeast can mean that in the fermenter, it can go different directions depending on the year. So, it's not, I don't think George would ever use the phrase natural fermentation, but it is the wine, it's the only wine that we make that sort of fits that category.
Relies on the native yeast.
Yeah. And one of the challenges is and these native yeasts that do come in, they don't last very long in the fermentation. Typically they can get it started. And then at very low alcohol levels, they sort of stop functioning. But it's even when you make exactly the wine you want, it's hard to understand what it was that you did, because it's got, a different population that starts it every time.
Yeah.
And this one right now, I think it does actually, I was, tasting this wine a lot last week, and I feel like it benefits from a little air and breathing. I think decanting this for a little while right now is helpful, but I think it's a really, really nice Pinot.
Yeah. What would you eat with it?
A lot of things. It's I did a number of dinners last week, and often they were paired with duck or lamb, and these are, it's hard to go wrong with that. And it's really delicious, but it's good with a lot of different things too. Like an herby pork tenderloin is super nice. My niece, who's vegan, is going to live with us here in the fall for a while. So I need to work on really nice vegetarian pairings with these things, but I know there are a lot of them. So
we'll have to check in on for the fall virtual tasting.
I have a recipe for chickpea pancakes that comes highly recommended. I'm going to work on that one.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I was going to say duck We had
Yeah.
a really delicious duck breast this last weekend. And it was with some fruit and some like warm curry spices, and something like this with the like really bright red fruit notes was really tasty. So yeah, duck.
Yeah.
All right. Primitivo, 2018 Primitivo as
Yeah.
well. So
It's over here
Primitivo,
somewhere.
it's somewhere. So Primitivo, I think almost everyone on here, you're all club members, you've been here, you sort of know the story, but just to recap a little bit, Primitivo is basically the same thing as Zinfandel.
It's exactly the same thing as Zinfandel.
Exactly the same thing as Zinfandel. But the wines can be quite different, though we pretty much make them in the same way, right? So what accounts for that difference?
So when we say it's the same thing as Zinfandel, I think this is all old material to you guys, but there is a very precise definition of what a variety is. And that is really, it just came from a single seed. So that's one, it's an individual in that species of plant. So somewhere way back in history, and I think we know this is thousands of years ago, there was a single seed that made the first plant. We don't know what they called that one, but the cuttings that got propagated from that plant, some wound up in Italy and were called Primitivo, some wound up in California and were called Zinfandel. And it's a longer and more complicated story than that, but those are the basics. But what happens when you propagate cuttings for a long period of time, you start to accumulate these little mutations. And I just talked about how those mutations can affect Pinot Noir.
Yeah. And we call them clones.
Right. Well, yes. So, I mean, I think the precise definition of clone is also a little different. You can have, I think we can have clones that have different numbers that you can't tell a difference between.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have just selections from old vineyards that aren't technically clones with numbers that you can associate with other things, but may, may confer a different flavor to the wine. So here, the Primitivo in the vineyard, it looks a little differently than the other Zinfandels. It tends to have smaller, looser clusters. It's naturally lower yielding, and really we make it more or less exactly the same way that we make the 7 and 22 Zinfandel. I find the fruit to be a little darker. It has some, in some years, I call it like toasted marshmallow. It's a little burnt sugar kind of thing that I smell. And there's a chocolatey, sort of a dark chocolate note that I find less in the other wines. And it's, again, Primitivo is, there's a lot of confusion over Primitivo that's unfortunate and historically deliberate. The U.S. Department of Agriculture muddied the waters in an effort to really protect California's Zinfandel producers from Primitivo labeled as Zinfandel here. And I think the root of the question is it's either the same variety or not. So I feel like, being told that Primitivo can't be labeled as Zinfandel would be like telling us that we can't label Chardonnay, right? And I think the response would be, well, it's either the same grape or not. And in this case, it is. But for reasons of clonal variation, this clone of that grape, here we're calling it Primitivo, tastes a little different than our other Zinfandels. And when you look at what we sell here at the winery, it's one that when people taste it, they like it a lot. Due to the confusion, they may be less likely to pluck it off the shelf somewhere without help, but when they taste it, it's a really good seller here at the winery.
Yeah. And I think in terms of, you mentioned like the toasted marshmallow and the chocolate, like that is something that we often pair with it when we have events here, is we'll do it with a dessert, like a dark, like a flourless chocolate cake or something like that.
Yeah.
Nothing super, super sweet. I know a lot of people love pairing it with Italian food. Tom and Janet are suggesting Italian sausage pizza.
Oh yeah.
If you think about like
that little sort of fennel, it's really good with this.
Yeah. And I think if you think the part of Italy where you see it the most is Puglia, southeastern Italy, that kind of makes sense. Like they're probably eating a lot of sausage down there. So I
have a new pizza oven on the way. I'm excited about this.
That is exciting. And let's see. Yeah, we're curious to know. Oh, that was Angela's question to the group, how the Primitivo holds up. So yeah, we're curious on your thoughts about it.
Like age wise,
Yeah.
it holds up super well. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, like with all these wines, the are we going to talk about the 7 and 22 Zinfandel?
Yeah, well, that's next. So
So
let's do that. Well,
I'm going to include the like how it holds up part in this, but
okay.
I went to a really interesting tasting yesterday, and it a group of wine industry people mostly had bought a bunch of 90s Zinfandels from a shop in San Francisco. So we were tasting things that range from 91 to 99. I think there was one 2000 in there, but one of the wines was a Zinfandel from our Block 7 in the Rosenblum label from 1996, and it was drinking absolutely beautifully. And these wines, it's important that they start with a reasonable level of acidity. But Zins can age very well, and some of them they tend to they dry out a little bit. They become more, and there was a lot of talk about this at the tasting. They become a little more like a claret or sort of an older, Bordeaux varietal blend. But some also maintain that distinct Zinfandel fruit for decades, and both styles are really nice. They can become more delicate and soft, but we had some that were 30 years old yesterday, and they were fantastic.
That's cool.
So
cool.
find a place to keep them at the right temperature and forget about them for a while.
Yeah.
And you won't be unhappy.
Yeah.
There's you have to, corks are part of the issue, and hopefully you win the cork lottery, but you have some that complicates it a little bit. Yeah, they can age super well.
Yeah, cool. And I would be curious if any of you guys, like, what's the oldest vintage any of you have of the Zin or the Primitivo? I think that would be kind of fun to know. Sometimes they're good at holding on to things. Yeah. I'm not as much, but especially the Zinfandel. I feel like I drink a lot of it in the summer. So as we're heading into barbecue season here, the Zinfandel and grilled meats is always a classic pairing for me. And if any of you guys visited, any of you locals came to our pairing tastings a couple of weeks ago here at the winery, I think, we paired the Zinfandel with this Cuban mojito pulled pork slider. And I think that was far and away everybody's favorite pairing of the day. So. Yeah.
And I think it's funny when you say like to pair wine with a hamburger, it always seems to be like you're disrespecting the wine, honestly, but there are all kinds of $25 hamburgers out there now. And that is true. And
I said grilled,
with the various things you can add to a hamburger.
Yes. Well, I said grilled food, and I was thinking more along the lines of like tri-tip perhaps.
Yeah, no.
But even like something, what we like grilled chicken. I think grilled chicken and Zinfandel is awesome. Yep. So,
it's some little slightly charred, smoky flavors are really good with it. Again, these wines are really spicy stuff is hard on them. But like, some fruit in a, you can have, I had some like a fig spread. Actually, I had a burger last night with a fig spread on it that was really nice with the wine.
Yeah. You drink Zinfandel.
Yeah, and herby things. Yeah, we did.
Herby things. Yeah. Cool. So Tom and Janet asked if there's a difference in the acidity between the two, and I'm assuming you guys mean between the Primitivo and the Zinfandel.
Not inherently. It's not a consistent difference. I think that the differences in acid levels that you see have more to do with the year and how it went and when it was picked, and also the winemaking. So certainly acidity is one of those things that if you don't like where it is, it can be changed. It's not the goal to be muddling around with it that way, but it's something, if you don't think there's enough acid, you can add tartaric acid back.
Yeah. All right. Should we move on to Cab Franc?
Sure.
All right. So this is the 2018 Cabernet Franc, which we're really excited about because we have not done this wine by itself as a varietal wine in a decade. right?
Yeah.
2010 was the last time we did it. So technically 11 years. So we thought we would just start by sharing a little bit about just Cab Franc generally. It's a grape that here we see it a lot. In Napa, it's often been used as a blending grape. That's how we use it. It is one parent of Cabernet Sauvignon. The other one being Sauvignon Blanc. And it's the parent of a couple of other things too, right? Merlot, Carmenere. So its descendants are kind of in a lot of places and very popular. They think it's originally from sort of the Pyrenees. We were debating earlier, France versus Spain. The folks in the
Basque, anyway.
Yeah, the folks
We don't
in that
think they're
area
French or
wouldn't
Spanish, but
exactly,
yeah,
they wouldn't identify French or Spanish either way. So, but sort of that part of Europe, and historically, it's been a part of Bordeaux blends, just like Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot and some of the other grapes it's related to. And again, that's kind of how we've used it here. But you do see it in other parts of France. The Loire Valley is known for their Cabernet Francs. Interestingly, I was looking this up over the last couple of days as we were getting ready for this. Italy is the second largest producer of Cabernet Franc, which surprised me globally. There's a lot of it in Friuli, which I was surprised by, up in northern Italy, but then a lot also in the Super Tuscans, those, a lot of Cabernet based blends coming from that area. So, and then here in the US, there's certainly a lot of it here in California, but also in New York and Virginia. And Pat, one of our club members, I see you on there, Pat, had asked us about it specifically. So we wanted to dive into it a little bit, how it's behaved here on the property, why we were excited to make it by itself in 2018. So,
I mean, I feel, and one of the things that happened over the last several years is that we heard from a lot of people who wanted us to make another Cabernet Franc again. And when we hear enough of that, we think there's a sales opportunity. So here we go. But it is interesting. I was looking at some of the information that Megan gave me earlier too. So it definitely seems like it is an old grape variety based on the fact that it's certainly the parent of some other grapes that we know pretty well. It seems like it's been around for quite a while. In terms of the way it grows, and I've always found this interesting about Cabernet Franc because people with incredibly different growing regions really like to identify themselves as Cabernet Franc producers. And it's, it really ripens kind of the way Cabernet Sauvignon does. And here that's 130 days essentially between bloom and harvest. That floats a little bit up or down every year, but not a lot. It tends to start to grow. It goes through bud break just, a day or two before Cabernet Sauvignon and also bloom a day or two before. So we're really picking it right around the time that we start to pick Cabernet Sauvignon also. It is another one of the grapes that's very expressive of these yearly differences. When it grows very vigorously in wet years, it produces more methoxypyrazines. And this is one thing that Cabernet Franc's famous for, that green pepper smell in the more vigorous versions of it. I also see it made really in pretty light, lean styles. And I've seen it made here in incredibly ripe, rich, soft styles. So it definitely, and I think with Cabernet Franc, you do still see it made in these less ripe styles, probably more so than Cabernet Sauvignon. I think there's kind of a trend for Cabernet to be pretty universally quite ripe. And Cabernet Franc still sort of all over the place. Right. It is also in Napa. Interestingly here, there are about 1,200 acres each of Zinfandel and Cabernet Franc in Napa. Over the last 20 years, Zinfandel's shrunk fairly slowly and Cabernet Franc's grown fairly slowly. Yeah. It's also on average the most expensive grape here. Yeah. That doesn't mean that everybody's rushing out to plant it. I think what it means more than anything is that there's really no cheap Cabernet Franc. Yes. But Yeah, it's
Yeah.
sort of unique in that way.
Yeah. And I feel like a couple months ago, we did a little Cabernet Franc tasting where we had gathered some Cabernet Francs, mostly from Napa. We had a French producer thrown in there as a ringer. I can't remember if there were some other California ones in there, but partly, you know, I asked if we could do this, and partly it was because I knew this wine was coming out, and because, you know, we haven't made it here in a while, and historically in Napa, it was always often used as a blending grape. You know, I thought, like, I need to get a really good handle on what Cabernet Franc is going to be like in Napa, and then sort of, you know, to be able to understand ours a little bit better. And the takeaway from that tasting was, it was hard to have a takeaway. I mean, as you said, there were ones that were really lean, you know, fairly light. And then there were ones that were really kind of bigger, bolder, a little riper.
Yeah.
It like really ran the gamut. To me, it did. I would say the one thing I noticed is in terms of the fruit, compared to Cabernet Sauvignon, it did feel a little more like red fruit as opposed to dark black fruit. But some of them had a lot of those pyrazines that you mentioned, that kind of bell pepper, green leafy kind of note to it.
Yeah.
In others, it was less pronounced. But I feel like that's often the point of reference for a lot of people, right? Is how does it compare to Cabernet Sauvignon?
Yeah.
And for me, it was a touch lighter in terms of the fruit, but still, you know, high tannin, quite high acidity, I thought, and fairly full bodied, but maybe a touch lighter than Cabernet Sauvignon.
Yeah. No, I agree with almost everything you said. I'm not sure I agree in every case with. I feel like the acid level has much more to do with when you pick it than
Sure.
any sort of inherent difference between that and Cabernet Sauvignon. But this wine definitely has, it's got a firm tannin structure. I think it's somewhere in between. It's, you know, again, it's not super ripe. It's not super unripe. It's kind of right down the middle. It will, I think it'll age very nicely. It has a great range of not just the fruit, but it has some of the, you know, in milder doses, some of the herbaceous qualities that make Cab Franc interesting too.
Yeah. Do you, in terms of drinking, are you enjoying drinking this now, or is this one that you might wait a year or two?
No, I like this now. I like tannin. I'm not averse to more tannic wines. I think it's definitely something that most of us will enjoy more with a meal, with food. I wouldn't make it something to, you know, I think we say this about most of our wines most of the time, but I think I'd have it with a fairly rich dish.
Yeah. And again, no offense to the wine, we paired it with a blue cheese bacon burger at our last club tasting, and that was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Because I think right now it does have some good tannins and some nice fat to stand up to it. It was kind of nice. Let's see. And so for us here, I think Pat was asking, you know, we did it in 2010. We're doing it in 2018. We're doing it in 19 or 20.
Maybe.
You'll have to stick around and wait and see.
Yeah.
What we are doing though, later this year, we're going to release a 2018 Petit Verdot, which we're also very excited about. So again, sort of one of the historical blending grapes, you know, Bordeaux blending grapes. And all of these go into our red blend. And that is another one that we haven't done in about a decade by itself.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the first time we ever made a Petit Verdot on its own was 2001, and it's still one of my favorite wines that we've ever made. Some of the other versions of it have been some of my least favorite wines we've ever made. Honestly, and I think of you know, that it can be extremely tannic, right? It can be very, and even for a guy who sort of is not averse to tannin, it can be a lot. It does tend to soften with time. I mean, it gets lighter and better balanced, but Petit Verdot can have really great complexity and range and structure. And in the years like 2018, where we had a longer sort of extended ripening season that wasn't particularly hot, those are the years where I think it performs best here. And you know, it's going to be a good one.
Yeah. So we're excited about that. And then you may see where this is going. If we've got the Cab Franc, the varietal Cab Franc, varietal Petit Verdot, we've always got our Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot and Malbec. We're going to put together another Bordeaux blending kit. And the last time we did that for the club was probably 10 years ago when we had all of those wines. So it probably won't be until fall of 2022. So this is like a very this is very long-term teas, but we will have that coming, which we're kind of excited about for the club, is that blending kit where you can, you'll get the blend, you'll get the component pieces and, some pipettes and a graduated cylinder and everything, and you can make your own at home and see how it stands up.
Yeah. And that's one of the challenges. I mean, if we do, we do try to do things that are a little different and hopefully interesting for you guys. And sometimes that means we need to it's often you're planning years in advance for that. Sometimes I have a problem planning a week in advance. So
No comment.
It's yeah. Let's change the subject.
Yeah.
Now,
But yeah, so I see a couple of you there. Julie and David are super excited about the Petit Verdot. So that will be coming sooner. I believe Angela can give me the nod, but that'll be coming out this fall. So you can get your hands on that before next year. So that should be fun. But yeah, the Cabernet Franc's been kind of a fun one. As Mike said, I think it's something we're seeing people ask for more and more.
Yeah.
It's for like Malbec a couple of years ago, now Cab Franc seems like.
Oh, but also, it's fun to drink different stuff,
Yeah.
right? You drink the same wine every night for a month. It's time for something else. So I enjoy the fact that we have this many grapes to do this kind of thing with. I think it's really fun to, even in small quantities, these aren't things that are going to be a big part of the Hendry label, but they're fun and they're interesting. And I think we have a vineyard that can support a lot of different kinds of fruit.
Yeah. All right. With that, let's open it up for other questions. Are there other things that you guys are, questions about the wines in particular, or the growing season, things like that? Do we have anything, Angela? Oh, we got one. All right. Ooh, okay. So Eric Scott has the patience that some of us don't. He still has a 2009 Cabernet Franc that we made, and he asks, when would we drink it?
We had wasn't it a 2008 that we had in the tasting you mentioned?
Yeah.
What and that
Hendry
was
2008,
really nice. I mean, I think you could drink the 09 now, but I wouldn't be in a hurry necessarily.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It sort of depends on like what you like about it, right? The tannins are going to soften a little bit and might develop more of those kind of like dried fruit, earthy kind of notes to it. But, if you like that, then you could keep going with it. Right.
I mean, you could drink it right now, but you could also wait a while longer. I haven't had an 09 for a little while.
Yeah.
Might try to dig one out of the library, but it should be in good shape.
Richard also asked, speaking of older wines, he has a 2005 cab in his chiller. Should he drink it now?
I think the 2005s, and this is one have been tasting a bunch lately.
Yeah.
It's got quite a slug of sediment, but it tastes really, really great right now.
Yeah, I like it a lot. And Kurt, I guess, seconds that, drink the 05.
Yeah.
So Daniel, sounds like this is off topic from the ones we've done today, but it looks like you got some of the Mission wine, which is something that we are very fond of, and you were curious what should we expect from it as a variety.
So it's it's a lighter style red, and made in a dry style. It can have more tannin than you expect from that kind of wine, and it's less fruity and sort of color wise. It's along the lines of Pinot, but it's less fruity than that. It has a distinctive sort of peppery characteristic. I compare it to Gamay all the time, which is dangerous because I don't drink a lot of Gamay, but I've in the ones I've had, that's where I go first comparison wise. So it's fun. Like it's such I feel, when I talk about this wine, the point I like to make is that it's the most important grape we have historically. And I think that certainly it's fun to know what kind of wine people were making here 170 years ago. And that was it. And for that's the wine that really launched the California wine industry, and it's worth knowing what it tasted like.
And it's one that you said it was more tannic than you would expect, like based on the color and everything, but we're
Yeah.
not talking like Cabernet levels of tannin, right?
No,
Yeah,
I mean,
so
you might be
it's-
able to make it that way, but it's, you know,
Yeah.
and Nebbiolo can do this too, right? You can see a wine that's pretty light in color that's quite tannic. But yeah, it's got its own distinct personality and
Yeah.
it's fun to
Fun to
taste.
do. And how long would you age it? Would you drink it soon? After
I think
release?
fairly
Yeah.
soon. We have a few bottles in the library. I can't say I've ever tried an old mission. We've
Yeah.
only been bottling it for 5 or 6 years now, I guess. It'd be interesting to see what it does. And I think a lot of these wines, one of the first things that this is Gilby is
If you tuned in
trying to join the.
last spring and saw Gilby in Mike's arms, Gilby is
There we go.
Gilby
This is
is
Gilby. He's not small anymore.
not small.
No, I forgot what we were talking about. Mission.
Yeah,
So,
aging it, yeah.
yeah, and I like often with these wines as they age, that sort of fresh fruit is one of the first things to moderate. And there's not a ton. I mean, the Mission can have some sort of plummy fruit initially. Yeah, well, you will see.
Yeah.
I wouldn't immediately say it's something you want to age for a long time, but it might
Yeah.
do interesting things for quite a while.
And I see some other questions in here too about how long you would age a Pinot Noir, thoughts on the age of the 2008 Petit Verdot. This actually makes me think perhaps we should do a virtual tasting where we kind of talk about aging and like what happens with
Yeah,
it.
maybe we should
And
pull out a bunch of the
pull out
library,
different
we'll do a
variety.
library
Yeah,
wine
exactly.
tasting
So
and we can,
let us-
everything
yeah.
from Chardonnay through to, we can do Cab Franc,
Yeah.
we could try our oldest Mission, we can,
let
that
us know
sounds fun,
if-
we can dig into the, we're always looking for people to share our library wines with, so.
And you guys would be
that
the
could be fun.
people. Yeah. So let
Yeah.
us know in the chat if that sort of sounds interesting. Now that Gilby's gone, we'll bring this back. Someone also asked if you're still making the Mike and Molly's Zinfandel.
Yes, definitely. We did not make one in 2020 because of the smoke. But we're selling the 2018 right now. Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
And then the Moore Vineyards, doing really well. Those vines are pretty incredible and they seem to be holding up well, even in these dry conditions and a dry farm vineyard. So we, again, try to do the work out there early, and I think we have decent canopies, and I think they're going to hold up okay through all this.
Going back to Cab, so Bruce LaBelle pointed out that the 2016 vintage in Napa is being highly touted and praised. How do we feel about our 2016 Cab relative to prior vintages?
I like it a lot more than the 15. I go back to, I like the 12, the 14, the 16.
Those even years.
It's weird, but true. Those vintages I like quite a bit.
Yeah.
It's got more, I think it has more density and structure and personality than the 2015. I found the 2015 was very, it was a little lighter than I like in Cabernet.
Yeah. I think the 16 you could then also potentially age a little bit longer. Yeah. All right. Well, Gilby, I think, is letting us know that our time here is maybe coming to an end. I think Gilby has other things he'd like to do, perhaps. But
Gilby's never gotten interested in Zoom.
Yeah, weird, right?
Yeah.
Or wine. But anyway, we were so delighted to get back on with everybody. We missed you guys. We are, as I said, going to do a couple of other virtual events this year. So just because we're coming back in person, we're not abandoning this platform entirely. We're going to do another Member Appreciation Month this September. And as part of that, we are going to do a trivia night, a virtual trivia night. So we realized that part of I know, you're not,
Wow.
Yeah.
What kind of trivia?
Hendry trivia,
Oh.
wine trivia, Napa trivia. There will be prizes. And we realized that part of, probably the best part of this whole experience is the chat and people getting to connect with people from, sort of
What was the
all
name of
over.
my dad's horse in 1947?
I don't know if we'll go that far back, but we'll throw some tricky ones in there. But yes, that'll be fun. And it'll give people a chance to kind of, connect in small groups and maybe meet people in the club that you haven't had a chance to meet yet. So we're excited about that. We'll do another one of these virtual tastings with your fall shipment. So I think that is slated tentatively for November 10th. So more information will come come out about that as we get closer. And then we'll keep brainstorming. It sounds like this library tasting might be kind of fun, and we'll think of some other things. So stay tuned, and we'll hopefully see you guys all virtually, or again, now that we are back in person, hopefully here at the winery sometime soon. So
yeah, thanks for joining us, you guys. It seems less, urgent than it did a year and a half ago, but it's still nice to be able to reach people all over the country this way. So
absolutely. So, all right. And well, thanks as always for your support, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.